This video is going to cover the causes of World War I as well as why the United States got involved. Take a minute to jot down the key terms, concepts, and people that you're going to need to know by the end of the video. World War I, or what was known then as the Great War, is seen by some to be insignificant in American history. This is because it pales in comparison to the magnitude of World War II. But to dismiss World War I as an irrelevant war is to ignore the impact it had on future events. The spread of communism in Russia, the Great Depression in America and Europe, the Armenian genocide, a flu epidemic that killed 25 million people, and of course, World War II. When World War I ended in 1918, it was like nothing anyone had ever seen. It killed more people, involved more countries, and cost more money than any war previously. It was the first war to use airplanes, tanks, long-range artillery, submarines, and poison gas. Major technological advancements resulted from the war and forever changed how wars are fought. Many historians argue about whether World War I could have been avoided. As you listen to the story of how the war broke out, as well as why the U.S. got involved, think about this question and decide for yourself if the war could have been prevented. Prior to war breaking out in 1914, there were a series of conditions that existed in Europe that made war there very likely. As you know, European countries were scrambling to build empires and competing for limited resources as they colonized Africa and established spheres of influence in Asia. Germany, for one, was eager to steal colonies from her foes, Britain and France. Their race for empire created a competition between countries in Europe that left many nations ready to fight for their position as the #1 power in Europe and the world. European countries were also engaging in militarism. This is when a country aggressively builds up their troops in preparation for war and also gives the military more of a say in foreign affairs. With Europe's major powers preparing for a war that didn't exist yet and having a military mindset, they were much more likely to choose war if and when a conflict were to erupt. There was also a system of alliances in Europe that existed prior to the war. The Allies were Britain, France, and Russia. Britain and France had a loose alliance, or an understanding between the two, that they would defend one another if need be. This makes sense due to their geography. If a country invades France, their next step is going to be Britain. France and Russia also had an alliance with one another, so by default, Britain and Russia were also allies. Serbia, a small country that borders Austria-Hungary, was a protectorate of Russia. A protectorate is a country that depends heavily on another country for support. Serbia was thus dependent on Russia, but was its own separate country. These countries made up the Allies. On the other side, you had Germany and Austria-Hungary, who were allies and were known as the Central Powers because they were centrally located in Europe. A system of alliances creates tension. Think about what happens when someone gets into a fight or argument with someone else, and each side gets their friends involved for backup. A small conflict between two people can quickly erupt into a major conflict between two groups. This is essentially what caused World War I to break out. These countries, who were allied against one another, competing for dominance in the world, also were engaged in nationalism. As you know, nationalism is a sense of pride in your country and the belief that your country is the best. This may not seem like a problem, but often countries who engage in nationalism act in their own best interest, do not consider the consequences that their actions may have, especially on other countries. Nationalism in an extreme form can also lead to terrorism, which is where we begin the story of how World War I actually started. In 1914, a 19-year-old Serbian terrorist was in Bosnia awaiting the arrival of the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Francis Ferdinand. Bosnia was recently annexed by Austria-Hungary, so the Archduke was there to visit the new territory. Bosnia and Serbia are neighboring countries and had strong ethnic ties and had wanted to join together, but because Austria-Hungary was a more powerful country, they annexed Bosnia against their will. Upset by this, the Serbian terrorist, whose name was Gavrilo Princip, shot both the Archduke and his wife. Within an hour, they were both dead. The assassination sparked outrage in Austria-Hungary. They demanded that Serbia make a commitment to stop supporting terrorists, particularly a well-known group known as the Black Hand, of which Princip had been a part. They gave Serbia a few days to respond. Once Serbia did not respond to the demand, Austria-Hungary felt justified in declaring war on Serbia. Russia now had to mobilize troops to defend her protectorate. As Russia mobilized, Germany declared war on Russia to support her ally, Austria-Hungary. Now that war had been declared on Russia, France and Britain also declared war on the Central Powers. In less than 2 months, the great powers of Europe were at war. The U.S. immediately declared itself neutral. However, we did not act as if we were entirely neutral. So this is why we got involved in World War I. To start, we immediately sympathized with the British. We have cultural and historical ties to Britain and had a strong trade relationship with them. Britain had also cut the transatlantic cable between the U.S. and Germany, so we were only able to get information from the Allied perspective. They consistently published anti-German stories of brutality, thus pushing the U.S. towards siding with the Allies. Once Germany established a naval blockade, disrupting our trade with the Allies, we began to prepare ourselves for possible involvement in the conflict in order to protect our economic interests abroad. Then, on May 7, 1915, a British passenger ship called the Lusitania was torpedoed off the coast of Ireland and sank. 120 Americans were killed. Although Germany had warned any ship crossing those waters with a notice saying that they do so at their own risk, the passengers thought they were safe because they were not a military ship. Little did they know that the U.S. had hidden weapons at the bottom of the ship prior to it leaving port and heading over to Britain, all under the guise that this was a harmless passenger ship. Germany got word of this and sank it. The public at the time did not know about the weapons and couldn't believe the brutality of the German Navy, that they would kill innocent people. Americans were therefore pushed closer to supporting a war with Germany. At this point in history, there was no technology such as sonar to detect submarines, so it was easy for Germany to sneak up and attack ships. After the sinking of the Lusitania, Germany promised not to sink any more passenger ships without warning, meaning if they suspected anything fishy, they would allow the passengers to get off the ship before they torpedoed it. Despite this promise, they still continued to attack ships without warning. After the sinking of the Sussex, Germany signed the Sussex Pledge in 1916 to officially promise to warn ships. Surprise, surprise, they announced in January of 1917 that they would continue to attack ships without warning. They believed that the war would be over before the U.S. could mobilize troops in Europe, so they were willing to risk antagonizing us. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare added fuel to the fire and pushed the U.S. to declaring war on them. Then, in March of 1917, the British intercepted a telegram that was sent from the German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann to the German ambassador to Mexico, asking them to ally with Germany in the event that the U.S. and Germany go to war. The Zimmermann note, as the telegram is known, stated that if the Mexican government would side with Germany, the Germans would make sure they got back the land they were forced to cede to the U.S. after the Mexican-American War. Mexico was in the midst of a civil war and posed no real threat to the U.S., but nonetheless, the U.S. government felt that Germany was going too far in provoking a neighboring country to attack us and felt we had no choice but to go to war with Germany. The last obstacle in our way was Russia. The Russian government was controlled by an autocrat, meaning a ruler with absolute power. The U.S. did not want to ally itself with an autocratic country. But in 1917, the Russian Revolution led to the fall of the Tsar, Nicholas II, and an end to autocratic rule. The U.S. now felt more comfortable joining the war on the side of the Allies. On April 6, 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany. In President Wilson's speech, he proclaimed that the U.S. sought to make the world safe for democracy and destroy German militarism. Make sure that you go back and have the key terms written down in your notes and that you answer the think questions that go with the video. Have a good night.